All right, Red Emma's folk, what up, what up, what up? Good to see you. Good to see everybody. Y'all ready? Y'all good for this? You been waiting for this? All right, good. Welcome to your new Red Emma's Bookstore Coffee House home. We are excited for you to be here. I am the poet known as Analysis, and on behalf of the entire team, we welcome you home to the brand new location. This is going to be your spot, all right? So tell all your supervisors at work that you're working out of the remote office on Greenmount Avenue, and if you run your own business, well then figure out a way to write it off some kind of way. So you can be here, indulge in the vegan menu, indulge in all of the books. When you came in, you looked at these shelves and you said, oh my God, they got rid of the books. No, we didn't, they're downstairs. All right, the other 8,000 are downstairs, all right? Eventually, because we bought not one but two buildings. We bought this one and the one adjacent to it, all right? So this one that sits along 32nd will be the bookstore next year when we finish renovating that side. We're gonna move the books upstairs. You'll be able to get in this way of 32nd Street. Downstairs will be the Baltimore Free School Classroom. You may have a workshop that you want to teach the community. You may have your radical left organization come over here to meet and take advantage of the restaurant in the space. That is what that is going to be for. So we're very excited, and we're very excited that you can now take advantage of it. Doors are open Wednesday through Saturday. Wednesday through Saturday, the cafe from 8 in the morning until 10 p.m., 8 to 10. You want to get the last food order in by 9:15-ish or so. The bookstore is open from 11 to 7, all right, 11 to 7. Again, this is Wednesday through Sunday. Now, as you already know probably, book events have been rolling, all right? We've already had a number of dynamic speakers to come test out the space this year. Tonight is no exception to that rule. I just want to give you a heads up on a couple of things. And the first I'm going to say, where do you find all of this stuff? At redemmas.org, redemmas.org. Go to the events page. You will also see us blasting it out on social media all the time and things like that. There are a number of things, too many to name right now. I do, however, want to bring your attention to, well, first and foremost, there's a big event happening tomorrow. How many of you have heard of Chelsea Manning? That's most folk, all right? If you don't know, Chelsea is one of the foremost whistleblowers in the United States and has been persecuted and imprisoned for such. Fortunately, she has just released her new memoir. It's called readme.txt, readme.txt. Chelsea will be joining us tomorrow night at 7 p.m. over in our sister space, 2640 space. That is at 2640 St. Paul in the basement of St. John's United Methodist. All right, that's going to be a big event. That's going to be dynamic. Red Emma's fan, Ryan Harvey, activist and singer-songwriter, will be there in conversation with Chelsea. I'll be doing a little something or another. I mean, it's just going to be a big event, a fun event, a very, very knowledge-dropping event. How do you get there? I want you to go to the website again, redemmas.org, go to our events page, and go to the Chelsea Manning event. You will see an RSVP. You will see an RSVP. That will allow you to purchase the book, which will also purchase your seat for that. Obviously, our events are free except for something like this that is going to be huge. So if you go to the website, again, hit the RSVP. That will allow you to purchase the book, all right, and hold your seat for tomorrow night's event. If you have any trouble with that or some other concerns, you make sure you see one of us, because we definitely want you to get there. But Chelsea Manning, we're all excited for that. That's going to be very dynamic. Next week, on Wednesday, and this dives right into what we're talking about this evening. Many of you are familiar with the case of Tyrone West, murdered in 2013 by Baltimore City. Many of you are familiar with Tawanda Jones. I heard some applause going up, most definitely. Tawanda and her team have held West Wednesday for more than 480 consecutive weeks now in protest of police brutality. We have had the honor of hosting Tawanda and the team before, and they will be back next Wednesday, all right? So this coming Wednesday, the 26th at 7 p.m., it will be West Wednesday number 483 right here at Red Emma's. We definitely want you to come out for that, learn more about the case, learn what we need to be doing. There will be interviews and many things. So those are two of the things coming up. Again, go to redemmas.org for all of those things. Of course, I'm going to remind you to be here on Saturday, November 6th for Red Emma's Mother Earth Poetry Vibe, hosted by me, featuring C. Alexandria Bernard Thomas. And mark your dates now. for Andrea Ritchie. Many of you familiar with Andrea Ritchie's previous writing, and again, jiving with exactly what we're talking about this evening. Andrea and Mariam Kaba have released a new joint. It's called No More Police, A Case for Abolition, all right? Following up on what we're talking about this evening, Andrea will be here Saturday, November the 26th at 7 p.m. Saturday, November the 26th at 7 p.m. That is going to be very dynamic. This is what we do at Red Emma. So put the word out. You all are now part of the marketing team of Red Emma's Bookstore Coffee House. I want you to tell everybody and bring a few folk. We are in Baltimore. Good God. This is ground zero and exhibit A for the need for police abolition. Not that any city in the United States is immune from that. We certainly are hearing that this week out of Kansas City and other things like that. But I'm so glad that there are expert writers to talk about it. Tonight we welcome two folk that are right on the case in terms of their scholarly research and activism and their insightful journalism. Derecka Purnell is a human rights lawyer, researcher, and author of Becoming Abolitionists, Police Protest and the Pursuit of Freedom, which we'll be discussing this evening. She works to end police and prison violence by providing legal assistance, research, and training in the community-based organizations through an abolitionist framework. As a Skadden Fellow, she helped to build the Justice Project at Advancement Project's National Office, which focused on consent decrees, police and prosecutor accountability, and jail closures. In the wake of the coronavirus pandemic, Purnell co-created the COVID-19 Policing Project at the Community Resource Hub for Safety Accountability. Certainly look forward to hearing more about that in terms of what that was about. The project tracks police arrests, harassment, citations, and other enforcement through public health orders related to the pandemic. Currently, a columnist at The Guardian and a scholar in residence at Columbia Law School up in Manhattan. Lisa Snowden is longtime Red Emma's fam. Lisa is editor-in-chief and co-founder of the Baltimore Beat. I want to make sure that you grab one before you leave. This is the brand new joint on the streets of Baltimore. This is giving you everything from a look at the arts and fun and creative articles to some in-depth analysis of some crucial situations in Baltimore from a real rad independent lens away from the corporate media control. So I want you to get the Baltimore Beat. We have stacks of them, okay, right over there on the bar, on the table. Red Emma's is where you can get it every week. All right, so we're so glad to have Lisa here. As always, Lisa's previous lead editor of over at the City Paper, The Sun, and the Real News Network, has produced documentaries on WYPR and all kinds of things. I'm gonna get out the way because we have to get into these very serious issues, so I want you to give a big, real radical Red Emma's applause for presenting Becoming Abolitionists, Police, Protest, and the Pursuit of Freedom, Derecka Purnell.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming out tonight. Thank you, Red Emma's, as always. Derecka, it's a real pleasure to see you again. Yes. You're one of the people that I know online, on Twitter, and then we got to meet in real life. I think it was like last year, and you're brilliant. So thank you, and thank you for this book. I want to start by talking a little bit about this book because I am not an academic at all. I'm a writer. I try to approach. For me, my approach to police abolition is very pragmatic. And I really appreciate the fact that your book is very pragmatic. It's very, even though you are clearly brilliant, I think that it's a thing that anybody can pick up at any stage of their political education. Can you talk a little bit about why that was the approach that you chose, and maybe even the way that your own path to abolition influenced that?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. That was the most artistic introduction I've ever had. So if you think that I'm going to perform, I am sorry to let you down, despite the soothing voice of analysis. Thank you so much for being here and for agreeing to do this. I'm really excited and honored to be in conversation with you. So why did I write the book this way? I did not plan on writing the book this way. It's the most honest answer. I have been writing about abolition for a few years, and I couldn't get anything published. Like nothing. I couldn't get anything published. I would just self-publish. I would publish on Medium. Huffington Post had a self-publishing feature, so I would just sort of write and try to get my stuff out there. And then I had an opportunity to write for In These Times, which is a radical paper that's based in Chicago. And then because police killed Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and lots of people went into the streets, and they weren't saying Black Lives Matter as much. They were saying defund the police. You know, major corporations like the New York Times and the Atlantic and the Washington Post were like, oh, what's this abolition thing about? So I received a random email from an editor at the Atlantic, and she asked if I could write about abolition. And so I started to pull out like different arguments for abolition, why it was important, why we needed it, but I was also pissed off. I was angry because at the time there were a lot of mayors, especially Black mayors, who would say that, you know, abolition is this white thing. Defund the police is this white thing. And there's all these white people who are coming from the suburbs. They come to your neighborhood, to your hoods, to your ghettos, and they're saying abolish the police and defund the police. And then they're driving back home to the suburbs with their well-resourced police departments, and you deserve that too. So I was angry at Ras Baraka. I was angry at, you know, mayors in Boston and Alabama. I was like, this isn't true. Baltimore. I wasn't gonna say Baltimore, but you said it. Baltimore. And it was frustrating. It was frustrating. So I ended up writing from that place. I ended up thinking about how to convey a story of how to tell stories of the traditions of abolition that made me possible, right? Black radical feminists who had always been thinking and writing from a place of survival and experimentation and curiosity. And so I started that piece by saying, you know, we call 911 for everything except snitching. Just to say, well, there are lots of people in exploited communities who've had radical critiques of policing, and there's also lots of people who had to rely on police, unfortunately, because of austerity, because of the exploitation, because of the divestment in our neighborhoods, right? And so it wasn't that we needed police to be more resources. We needed more resources, right? And the city's answer was more police, more police, more police. So the book kind of flows from that Atlantic article, which was the foundation, I guess, for the introduction. And then as I continued to write, my editor for the book was like, you know, you should explain, you know, why did you have these ideas? Why were you a part of this organization called Youth Crime Watch of America when you were in high school? How did that happen? Like, how did you end up in Youth Crime Watch of America, right? A program that was committed to making sure that young high school students had a safe place to snitch with cops. Like, how did you do that at 14 and 15 and 16 and end up being, you know, an abolitionist, someone who was calling for us to think differently about the prison industrial complex? So I think through her pushing me and thinking more critically about what and who made me possible, the book turned out the way that it did.
I want to pause a little bit and talk about the things that you just brought up, kind of the difference between maybe like white liberal, white progressive, and then being in this space, because that's something that I see and actually get a lot. Like sometimes I'm even accused of being like a puppet for white people, which is very insulting to my intelligence. But it can be a weird place to be in, because I think that sometimes white progressive people they've read the right books and they feel like they've done the right thing, so they don't want to listen. Like they can still have racism too.
Oh yeah, of course.
And like in your book, you talk about, you know, being a black woman, being somebody that comes from very like working class roots. So how do you manage kind of in those spaces where you're, you know, you can't hide being a black woman, but being like a black woman, working class roots, and having some of these ideas that can sometimes be brushed off as elite or white you know.
Yeah, I think I'm just really lucky. I think I'm really lucky because I just, again, have been made possible by people who are committed to black and multiracial organizing. And what that means is that the people who I've been fortunate to be, you know, in deep conversation with, deep critical thinking with, people of all races and backgrounds, I think that we know that we show up to the room kind of racist or homophobic or sexist, right? I think that we know that. And the beautiful thing, I'm gonna shout out Porvy right here, because Porvy, when I was entering law school, was such a role model for what I'm about to explain. the people who helped to make me think as an organizer, ultimately a lawyer, we were committed to reading and struggling together and to confronting those sets of social conditioning, right? That mattered a lot. And so sometimes, and I see a lot of this online, someone like a young activist is like, oh, this space is so violent, right? It's so violent. Everything's violent. Literally everything's violent. Space is so violent. Or, I'll see complete deference from white people to black women, the whole trust black women, defer to black women. And I see that, unfortunately. Maybe they just deferring to the wrong black women, but I see the complete deference, right? There's no critical thinking, no critical debate about, well, what is it that we're trying to build and what are we trying to struggle together? And so the spaces where I consider my political homes, what makes us that space so powerful is that, again, we're aware that we're showing up with our various social conditionings that made us possible. And we know that the social justice experiments that we have are just that, right? Mm-hmm. They're messy experiments of trying to build the world that we want. Mm-hmm. That's what they are. Which means that if you're a white person, you're probably gonna have racist ideas about people. And that's not just because you were born that way, it's because of how you've been conditioned, right? Mm-hmm. And so I appreciate being in struggle with people who understand that, right? For all the things that we're trying to work through. And just not have complete deference to what one group says or an entire race says, because that's ridiculous. That's not the tradition, at least the radical black feminists that I'm reading or I'm in community with, that's not what they want, right? Or it's not just, well, I get to tell you what to do because I'm a black person. It's trying to figure out, well, how are we, again, practicing the world that we want, knowing that we've been conditioned to think all these terrible things about each other and to have such respect for the institutions that ultimately harm us. And navigating that, it's a challenge, but it's something that we practice all the time.
Yeah. And that's, I think, the important word, practice, because it's something that you're always doing. It's showing up to do this work, but also making sure that you're checking yourselves and checking the people that you're working with, and also respect, because I feel like if somebody brings me into a room because I check some boxes because I'm black and a woman, mm-hmm. and then let me do whatever, I'm not perfect. I don't, and then they're not pushing back.
I think you are perfect, but most other black women are not
and
perfect.
And asking, that's not an actual relationship.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, some people get invited to a room. Some people get invited to be vice president of the United States. So I'm just saying I'm saying that's a real thing. Did that not happen? I thought that happened.
It did happen.
No, because here's the thing. What's so frustrating about that is that we know that when people of color get picked to do these positions, they're going to face all kinds of racism, right? All kinds of sexism. We know that's going to happen to Supreme Court justices who are people of color. We know that's going to happen to our VP picks. So in the one sense, we have to defend those people from the racist, sexist attacks that come after them, while saying, well, yes, you don't deserve that horrible hatred that's being spewed your way, but you're also perpetuating violence through the incarceration system, through being the face to go in front of immigrants and say, don't come here, right? To provide a shield for a nation that drones other countries, right? That's what you're doing. So we have to figure out, well, hey, sweetheart, hi, Annika. How do we protect people, right? How do we protect people and say, no, this is wrong, you aren't allowed to do that, but not let that fear of being critical then do something worse, which is to let other systemic forms of violence flourish. And that's what I see happening today.
So when you make these critiques, which I think are valid, of Kamala or Barack Obama, like you do in the book, or some of these folks that we're seen as kind of the pinnacle of black excellence, do you get a lot of pushback?
No, yeah, of course, yes. I get all the pushback. What's so wild is that, especially in my Guardian column, it's one of the few times where if I write something that's critical of President Obama or VP Harris, I'll get emails from racist white people, which I get for anything. I wrote about Kanye. I'm getting racist emails. I'm why are you even mad?
They should be happy.
Why are you even mad? So I'll get racist emails. But when I write about, people of color, I get not only the racist emails, I also get, why are you trying to tear down a black man emails, which are, I get it. I mean, when I got into Harvard, I remember my grandmother telling me wow, you're going to be the next Obama. And I was like, oh, Grandma, like, that's so sweet. I'm not about to talk about neoliberalism right there with my grandmother, like in her, in her nursing home. I was like, that's so sweet, Grandma. I'm going to try my best to outdo him, right? That's how I, but yeah, I get all sorts of pushback, right? But I think that, again, it's related to what I said earlier. There's a deep fear, and I talk about this in the book. When I was in college, when Obama was elected, I went to college in Missouri, and I had to debate with, white girls who were in college just 100 miles away, who just early that day were telling me they couldn't wait to have a wedding on a plantation in southern Missouri, right? Get into a debate with them again at one of our little conference sessions about Obama's birth certificate. And me crying, so I'm just like, oh my God, like, how could you do this? This is so dehumanizing. So being, being in that place, I understand, again, that, unfortunately people are gonna be racist towards him as a person. But then you keep reading, right? You keep going around people who are more curious, who have sharper critiques. I remember the first person I met who was a black man who said he wasn't voting for President Obama, and he was voting for a Green Party candidate. I went off. I was like, my ancestors did not die for you to vote for Cynthia Nixon or whoever it was at the time. I was so angry. I was furious. And then the more we talked, the more I was like, oh, wow. I didn't even realize that they had legitimate critiques of the Democratic Party. I just didn't know. And so the more I knew, the more I grew. And that, again, only came because I was willing to be pushed. I was willing to ask questions. I was willing to find more people who just have more experience and just a deeper analysis of the problems. And so that pushback, I just have to take in and say, no, I understand. You're afraid that this, and you also know that the kinds of pushback that he's getting is different than other pushback that other people get, right? I just try to affirm that in the spaces where I am. And now at this point, I mean, not all black people are defending President Obama. That's not what's happening. They'll say, some people, there's the 8 years, no scandals crew. But a lot of people are like, damn, this is, healthcare I guess could have been so much better than what we had. I would much rather have my kids go to school for free, or just so many other social policies. And I don't think I have to be the one to tell them that. But when I do, sometimes I get pushback, yeah.
Okay. So you write about being in Ferguson after the death of Mike Brown. You write about coming here to Baltimore, and those and some of those other deaths that happened that really put the spotlight on police brutality. It feels like, we got some little concessions, which you write about in the book, and now to me it feels like Democrats were like, all right, y'all had your little moment, that was cute. Now we're all gonna be basically marching on the road to more and more policing. Can you talk about, do you agree with that, or how has the world kind of changed since you started the book, put out the hardback, and now you have the the soft cover? So what things have changed?
Wow. Yeah, I, like many of you, remember when saying the phrase Black Lives Matter was a touchy subject. It was like, whoa, calm down. I remember that. I remember it being a risk. I remember when there was this, I can't remember what group I was having a conversation with, and this woman said, at her church, they were fighting each other over whether they should put a Black Lives Matter sign in her yard, in the church's yard. I remember those debates. I remember when it was such a deep critique of what was happening, and then I remember seeing, Black Lives Matter on Saks Fifth Avenue website when they had a sale, and I was like, damn, okay, do black people get extra discounts? Why is Saks Fifth Avenue saying Black Lives Matter? This is fascinating. I saw it on Nike. I was like, oh, this is interesting. And then in the uprisings in 2020, I remember seeing all of the Black Lives Matter signs in the windows. Did y'all remember seeing this? It's just, do you know the story? I guess it's in Exodus when God says, hey, Moses, I'm about to kill a whole lot of people here. Have them put blood on the door. Y'all know what story I'm talking about? Have them put blood on the door so I'll know to go
over.
Yes. That's what it felt like. It felt like people were putting signs up so they wouldn't get their windows cracked, knocked in. it was like, whoa, this is like, don't do that. And I often think about, okay, like you said, that moment, like, okay, you got what you wanted, you got that moment. I think, wow, people had to delete that from their websites and put up new banners. Or people had to take those signs down, right? Like, I was like, as much as there was like a doing, there was also an undoing. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because a lot of that energy for some people was channeled through electoralism, and that we're gonna get these, progressive bills passed, like the George Floyd Act. We're gonna name it, and that didn't even get passed, but we're gonna name this act after George Floyd, and it's gonna help stop police violence and hold cops accountable, when actually just gave much more money to lots of other types of cops to do more investigative work around policing, and that didn't even pass, right? That's one thing I think that's happened that's made me so sad, to see a lot of hope and a lot of faith be put in these large singular bills that's not, we don't have police killings because we don't have laws against police killings, right? We have police violence because we have capitalism, and we have, we have capitalism and we have inequality, and police manage to maintain like colonial violence, capitalist violence, carceral violence. That's what they do. And you're not gonna, one piece of legislation is not gonna stop that, right? You're not gonna take the bad parts of policing out of police. The good that happened, I would say, in 2020 is that the mainstream demand shifted from just Black Lives Matter to defund the police. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of frustration, I think, within the Democratic Party around defund the police, because Nancy Pelosi is not going to kneel to defund the police. It's not going to go up in a banner at the convention like Black Lives Matter. You're not going to see Biden looking into the camera and say, defund the police. Mm-hmm. That's not what's going to happen. It became so much harder to co-opt that, unless you're like a libertarian. But if you're in the Democratic Party, saying defund the police is so much more of a criticism of what's happening than even Black Lives Matter. And I think when people continue to say that and try to figure out how to organize against it, how to stop new police academies from being built, right? How to, get money divested from more quote unquote reforms and have them redirected to interventions that actually could save people's lives. I think that was huge. And not only did we see that, again, be looked at as some like slogan as it was attempted to be reduced to, but hundreds, thousands of organizing projects all across the country launched as a result of that demand. And I think that is amazing. I think that's incredible. And so I think people look at a few losses, like maybe in Washington, then in Minnesota, and say, this ballot initiative failed. Like, people don't want to defund the police. There was this Black woman lawyer who wrote this New York Times article, I think the day after that ballot measure failed, and she said something like, see, Black people don't want this stuff. We want real pragmatic solutions, right? Like that was the response. But that it was a ballot initiative in the first place, I think is a huge, huge, huge win. Mm-hmm. Even though people think that, like, we should, like, look at polls as ways to see if people are on board with this idea. Well, organizers, thank God, don't defer to polls. Like, we organize to help shift and raise public consciousness around the type of world that we deserve. And so people were so happy that these one or two things failed that they just completely missed or didn't want to pay attention to all of the serious anti-police organizing that was happening and all the other beautiful interventions that happened along the way. And so I think that it's great that when I was in law school, most people were not talking about abolition, right? That was not the case. But now, if you don't talk about abolition, students are probably going to, like, ask about it. They're going to start their own reading groups, right? They're going to say, whoa, we want a class about this. We want more text. We're going to take over a journal issue and then make sure that people can read about it. So that's happening in college and law schools, that's happening inside of prisons, right? One of the birthplaces of the prison abolition organizing and conversation, people are incarcerated. That is happening in all of these spaces. I think it's a huge, huge, huge result of the organizing that happened in 2020 and then the decades-long organizing that happened before then.
So are you saying that if we want to look for wins or we want to look for progress, it's not going to be those big, now this has passed. It's going to be smaller, and it's going to be things that maybe don't even ever make headlines.
Yeah, and I don't think they're going to make headlines. Like, no, so Dream Defenders, for example, in Florida, they started a healing and justice center. You know, when they went door knocking around abolition and black people were like, oh, we're a little bit scared. We don't really know what that means. Like, what's going to happen? We actually really need a clinic here, or we actually need people to do, like, to help us solve problems. They open up a free clinic, and they open up a healing and justice center, and they have a mobile unit that responds if you call them instead of calling the police. Right? And a medical doctor, a licensed therapist, and someone who de-escalates, that's who's going to, like, show up and try to, you know, help people in those crises. That's not the story of the New York Times. You're not going to read a story about that because it's not in the New York Times' interest to have a story about that, right? What you are going to get is something from someone like Charles Blow to say, like, defund the police is dead. As this organization is doing this work in Florida, as the work is going on in Chicago with all of, not only the ballot initiatives, but again, the direct organizing, people trying to be responsive to the actual concerns of what people say and what people hear when we say defund the police. It's not going to cover what's going on in St. Louis with the Freedom Community Center and Action St. Louis. Like, there's literally tons and tons and tons and tons of programs and projects, interventions, political education circles that's happening. But yeah, it's not in the interest of the people who benefit from saying this thing lost, right, to run it, to talk about it. Like, your work is so important, the work of other journalists is so important, because we need that coverage. We need people to know that it is happening.
And do you think that work is also being done, because I'm seeing, like, sitting in Baltimore, I know that there are people working in Baltimore, and they're doing great work. Are there ways that, like, how do these things kind of link up and create larger change? It's not just maybe like in communities like Baltimore or St. Louis.
Yeah, well, all the examples I listed, they're all connected. All those people sort of know each other. So they know each other through a larger movement for Black Lives ecosystem, where people convene regularly and ask, like, hey, you know, we're doing this defund campaign. This is what we're experiencing. I was just at the Socialism Conference in Chicago, and it was maybe 250 people in that room, and this is right after that Charles Blow column came out. And I said, raise your hand if you're working on the defund campaign. And more than half the room raised their hand. More than half the room, right? And so afterwards, people were like, oh, what city are you in? So people are connecting that way. And people are also connecting across borders, right? That's also happening. It's like, oh, this cop watch program in Hackney that I just went to, that I just visited, I guess, early last week? What's today? Thursday. Last week, I just visited this cop watch program in London. They're like, oh yeah, we actually saw what was happening in this part of St. Louis. Like, oh, we should probably try to do this here. So that's happening across, like, international borders. It's happening across state borders. It's happening across carceral borders. There's prison organizing, anti-prison organizing that's happening inside of prison. So there's all of this is happening. And at least, again, the ones that I'm familiar with, they are connected. There's not, I would say, like a national singular campaign to defund the police, because the police are funded by, like, cities, and so those projects are going to be cities. There could be different national or federal legislative acts that could help towards that, like eliminating federal funding for police, because that just started in the 1960s. Like, that would be a worthy cause of something to fight for, to help reduce one source of police funding. But there's not going to be like a defund the police act that comes in and then sweeps across all cities, for example.
Final question. I know,
oh, wow.
And then I want to open it up to y'all to see if anybody has questions. But I wanted to ask you, I know that you mentioned, we were talking today, that your books go into prisons.
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the reaction that you get from people who are behind bars that read this?
Okay. Can I see this real quick? All right, don't look at my junk right here. So hardback books don't get into prisons because prisons say it's a weapon. All books are kind of weapons in prison, but it's a weapon. And so, as you can imagine, it's also much harder to get your book in a prison if there's a cop car on it that's kind of burning with some flowers that kind of obscures the fire, right? And so one thing I negotiated with the publisher is to print a separate copy for free for anyone who wants it, who's incarcerated. And I've been, again, just very, very, very fortunate to have lots of people who do inside, outside prison organizing to get, I don't know now, more than 1,000 maybe free copies into prisons. And it's a completely different cover, a completely different looking book. And one of the book clubs that ran it inside of prisons that send copies inside is No Names Book Club that's headquartered in LA. And one thing that they do is ask our book club members to write reviews of the book, which is scary. It's like having your book reviewed is like, it's scary. It's like that scary. But I asked if I can include some of the reviews inside the book because I was so impressed. So I was like, yeah, I mean, these blurbs matter to me. I really care what Elizabeth Hinton and Robin Kelly and Miriam Kaba says about my book. I also deeply care about what people inside have said. So I like this one a lot. Can I read some? Because they're so cool.
Yeah.
Becoming Abolitionists is an amazing and insightful book. It gives me hope that maybe we can live in a society free of the need for police or prisons. Me being incarcerated, I know firsthand the adverse effect prison has had on the psyche. Daniel in California. This is from Alfred. I did receive my last book, Becoming Abolitionists. I must say, what a read. I only really put it down to eat or go to sleep. Becoming Abolitionist is a very, very deep book that I needed in my life. It feels weird to say this next part out loud. Derecka Purnell is breaking things down to the ground.
Yes, Derecka Purnell.
I'm seeing things in a different light than I had before. And then Mansour in Texas. I was talking with someone about becoming abolitionist, and I was saying that her approach is much more effective than a lot of other material because she personalizes and humanizes her politics in contrast to simply giving the reader dry, mundane theories. I liken it to the church, especially Black church.
Yes.
I mean, like, yeah, so it means, like, it just really means the world to me. Like, that people are fighting to make sure that, you know, books get inside of prisons. When George Jackson says, you know, fascism is already here, we see that. We just expected the sort of fascism to stay inside prisons with the banning of books and access to knowledge, with the existence of books in prisons, with the existence of prisons, and so that people are risking, like, are risking their lives to read in prisons, right? To say, like, we want to be able to, like, have access to this knowledge and critique and also share. And I also try to continue to read things from people who are in prison too. So it's, you know, it just means a lot to me. So the reception has been great, and I'm just really appreciative.
Okay. So I think I wanted to open it up to anybody who had questions.
And what we want to do is I'm going to bring the mic to someone who has a question, and we ask that you keep those questions kind of direct and truncated, because we could be here for hours getting into this very important subject. But if you do have a question, please raise your hand and I'll come around. And of course, we do encourage diversity of questions. I know there's so many thoughts going through your head, you'll probably put them together. I'll just say first, really as a comment, thank you so much for what you said, especially in terms of deconstructing this mythology of Black centrist Dems being our saviors, whether you talk about Barack and Kamala on down through state and local levels. And I find that, especially as it relates to examining the need to deconstruct policing in America, especially in many of our Black families who had police officers in family.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Or church. One of my elders growing up at church was, I believe he was actually the second officer friendly for Baltimore when they instituted that PR program. And so many of our Black families have a kind of an entrenched view of policing from a hey, we've achieved it and we've gotten it from this side and that type of thing.
I think about how I'm from Annapolis, and the shining star, one of the shining stars of my family is like one of the first police chiefs in Annapolis. Like, that was kind of set up as one of the ways to be upwardly mobile.
Of course, yes. That's when, again, one of the Black mayors who made me angry was Lori Lightfoot.
Oh,
because
Lord.
when people were, she's a mayor, Black queer mayor of Chicago. When she, a reporter asked her, you know, what do you think about defund the police? And her response was so perfect for the book. It was so, I couldn't have written it better myself. She said, you really want to eliminate one of the few pathways that Black and Latinos can become middle class in this city?
Yeah, amazing.
I said, oh, yeah, exactly. It's a jobs program. It's a carceral jobs program. This is so they get paid to lock up poorer and Blacker people. Oh, okay. This is exactly what you want. Yeah.
And the funny thing about that in terms of my family is that my own nephew was murdered by police in Frederick, Maryland in '07, tased to death. And granted, it was on another side of the family, but the particular side of the family that I'm talking about, they know that happened. They've heard or read my poem about the matter. So it's not like that's an unknown thing for most of them. But still there's this entrenchedness of, okay, that was the exception to the rule and not the thing. And I think you all hit on it right there. Other questions and comments?
Oh, also before, because I think we only have like 10, 15 minutes left. If you're a part of a campaign or you're doing organizing work and you want people here to plug into it, can you raise your hand really quickly? Okay, one person. Well, that's good. Dustin, do you want to say it? Okay, cool. So we can go to Dustin after you. Yes. And you too? Okay.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to read your book. I would like to bring it home here, not only in Baltimore, but in Charles Village and Hopkins, where most of you probably know that this is the time we're fighting against the creation of an armed private police from my employer. And at this point, I don't see anything else than civil disobedience.
You don't see anything else?
Than civil disobedience from
Okay.
the faculty to, we've exhausted all other means. So I would like you, if you have anything or any advice and any thought on, what civil disobedience at this point can do. And for anyone else who wants to know more, I'll be happy to give more details, but what you can do if you live in Baltimore or work in Baltimore, this is the last window of opportunity outside of civil disobedience in the coming year.
Yeah, yes, very important question. We should talk after, because we shouldn't talk about civil disobedience tactics on camera in front of an audience. And so maybe I can find you after, if that's okay. Yes, but I highly encourage anyone who's interested in fighting against the development of this police force, which I know has been at least a campaign since 2018. I remember meeting with some students.
They put a pin in it after George Floyd's death, and they were like, oh, people are mad, but they'll calm down.
Right. Refund. Yes. Just the PR is so good. Don't refund, defund. It's so ridiculous. But yes, okay. Yeah, well, so we should talk after. And other people who want to be a part of this campaign, can they come talk to you? Okay, awesome. Okay, especially from faculty and staff. Amazing, thank you.
Yeah, this is Dustin. Well, I'll say there's like a current fight right now to stop Johns Hopkins police force from happening, which is like right here, which is like, gentrifying, continuing to displace people. So there's a way to people plug in locally. Let's Get Free, which is the Women and Trans Prisoner Defense Committee. We do letter writing every Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Instagram, you can find us at Women in Prison. And then the Human Rights Coalition, which is co-founded by a lot of people, one including Russell Maroon Schultz, rest in power. They do letter writing as well on Thursday nights, 6 p.m. And you can find both those on Instagram and Facebook too, for people that still use Facebook. And I would say letter writing is important because that's how that's how we root ourselves, that's how we ground ourselves. Then me and my man Solomon right here, we got a course that'll be at the top of the year probably about abolition for black people in Baltimore and beyond through New Generation Scholars, which you can find on Instagram. My question is like, St. Louis is like a place that is like a lot of violence happens in the same way that it does in Baltimore, and like a lot of the response is usually like, so if you get rid of the police, then what? And that's like a very valid concern. And I guess it's just like that open is like, what do you do? And like, what do you say to those people?
Yeah, very important question. One reason why I fell in love with Baltimore when I came here during the uprising is because it reminded me so much of St. Louis. Like, just so much of St. Louis. Even the city-county thing, it's just, just so much the same. Cardinals are better than Orioles, but outside of that. I just had to say it. That's why the cover's red. Come on, you know what this is. Yes. Okay, so what do I say? So just so much. One thing I try to do, which is put people at ease and be honest. And the people I'm thinking about right now are people who are deeply interested, very, very skeptical, right? Not people who are saying this because they're antagonistic, but people who are like, yeah, I F fuck 12, but I don't, what to do, what to say beyond that. I'm sorry. I have a funny story to tell you about my 8-year-old saying he's gonna write F12 when he becomes an adult. Remind me to tell you this story later.
Not him
This
making
is
plans.
big plans. I said, we just thought this Tuesday morning to say that to me? What is going on? So what I try to say to people who are deeply passionate, very skeptical, is that unfortunately what's not going to happen in our lifetime is the eradication of 18,000 law enforcement agencies, and that 1 million cops are not going to be fired, and that 2,300 jails and prisons are not going to close. Like, I try to be honest about that, because that's not what's going to happen. That the people who are living today, I'm thinking in particular like my mom in North St. Louis, I say, you're not going to experience the total eradication of police of your time. We have Larry Hogan saying refund the police when they haven't even lost money, right? Like, that's not what's going to happen. And what the task is before us for this generation is to figure out how can we make sure that we're stopping the expansion of policing and doing the best that we can to shrink it. Right, and so what that means is figuring out how to be responsive to community-based violence, carceral violence, capitalist violence, colonial violence. And we have to do this at the same time, over time, like as a gradual process towards their obsolescence. Like, that's what we're up to. And so in St. Louis, for example, when we were trying to close the jail, the workhouse there, this is one of the first questions I asked a group of organizers there. I said, and I got pushback because they were like, well, if we answer this question, if we entertain this question, we're entertaining the what about black on black crime question. Like, that's the question, right? And I was like, well, it's not that we're entertaining that question, because there are people who ask that question because they are critical of activists, right? They're like, what about black on black violence if we abolish the police? But they don't really care. It's just a way to get them to stop talking about police violence. But there are people who ask that question, like you said, who are vulnerable to violence from their neighbors, from strangers, from their lovers, and from police, right? And they genuinely want to know. And we not only have to be prepared to think about how to be responsive, but we have to be committed to saying, well, either we'll help, figure out and experiment with responses, or at least connect it to people who will. And so in St. Louis, one thing that we did was try to figure out how can we get street violence interrupters in particular neighborhoods as one intermediate response towards this broader project of closing this workhouse, because that's what people wanted. They didn't want to call the police, and they also didn't want the shootings to continue to happen. And guess who opposed and are still fighting against the street violence interrupting programs? Guess. The police. The police. The police, right? Because what happens, we didn't want the street violence interrupters that worked with the cops. We didn't want that. We wanted the independent ones. And when they finally got funded, the police have been at them this whole, look, there was a shooting today. Where are the street violence interrupters? And people are like, where are y'all? Like, they've been getting shot every day for the past, 50 years, right? But the police are antagonistic to it. Why? Because if it starts working, it threatens their funding. It threatens their jobs. It threatens their legitimacy and their credibility. And so this whole notion that, oh man, the police are just overworked and people want them to do everything and they just can't. They just need more funding. When it's like, oh no, let's do this thing somewhere else, they're like, oh no, it's not time, right? And so what Dream Different is, that example that I offered, it's like they're trying to be responsive to the concerns of the people in that community, and they're doing that through experimenting with these different projects, and they have a deep commitment to keeping that neighborhood, those neighborhoods in Liberty City safe, while also, pushing candidates who are pledging to not give more money to the police, who are pledging to not lock more people up, while doing political education and public conscience raising around capitalism, right, socialism, internationalism, and ableism, right? Like, they're doing all of those fights at the same time, because that's what it's going to take. And I think that level of commitment, like as we've seen throughout our Black radical tradition, is sort of what helps to, again, raise consciousness and bring people into the movement, instead of being fearful of it's never going to happen, so we shouldn't even try. That's a good question. Thank you, Dustin.
You made me think of Robin D.J. Kelly's re-release of Freedom Dreams, you know, and constructing what we want to see. Not just deconstructing what is, but constructing what we want to see with their last comment.
Yep.
I'm going to let you slide on that Cardinals-Orioles crack.
I mean, I just had to
Largely
say
because
that.
it's been true the past couple of decades. But also on that note, I'm trying to see if we have one more question over here. I want to come back to that idea of celebrity culture and presence in this
okay.
movement. Speaking of sports, but let's get this question.
Campaign thing now?
Yes,
Can-
yes,
okay.
please. This
Okay.
is what this is for.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
So two campaigns I just wanted to lift up that are one is quite relevant here. One might be a little attenuated, but I think it's very related. So Organizing Black is moving forward a campaign about the banning facial recognition technology. There was a phones app today. If you want any information about it, you can find them on Instagram, Organizing Black. For background, on January 1st, Baltimore City's moratorium on facial recognition technology is going to expire, and then the city and businesses are going to be able to use it without many protections for folks like you and me and everybody outside at all. So we're trying to stop that. Organizing Black is trying to stop that. I also did a phones app today. Invite everybody else to. And then second,
Oh, wait, do they contact you if they want to be involved in the campaign to stop it, or how do they?
you can go to Organizing Black on Instagram, and there's information there. And I'm happy to connect you directly to the folks who are doing the direct organizing, if you want to talk to me afterwards. And then a campaign that I'm more directly involved in, Baltimore Renters United. I bring that up. We have a citywide tenant meeting on October 29th. It's digital. It's 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock. And I raise that because I think we have a really clear understanding that a huge part of the purpose of policing is to protect property.
Yes.
And it goes all the way back to when black people were categorized as property, right? Comes out of slave patrols. That's what they do now. And so if we are addressing, the needs of tenants and moving property into a place of community control and community stewardship, then we're starting to eradicate the purported need for police in the first place. So if anybody is a tenant, you're welcome. And if you're a homeowner, come talk to me and we can talk about how you can be in solidarity with tenants. Okay? Thank you.
And can I interject real quick? That tenants meeting is in this week's issue of Baltimore Beat. It's online.
Look at that.
And
You see that connection?
And if your community, I know you talked about some events, some letter writing. So anything that you want that's like a community event, Lisa at BaltimoreBeat.com, it will go in that community event calendar.
Derecka, do you, let me back up. We're talking about the need for grassroots organizing, which is what we're doing here in terms of connecting and what have you. I still often think about the role of celebrity culture in movements. Movements cannot be based on celebrity culture, obviously. But there's still a role to be played. Colin Kaepernick's and Eric Reed's, movements and demonstrations exhibit A thereof in terms of raising awareness on a lot of the things that we're talking about. Where do you see now any activism in terms of celebrity culture, celebrity activists who really are out front as far as abolition is concerned, not just reform? Because there are any number of celebrities that were talked to a degree or another about certain reforms, but in terms of a staunch abolitionist aspect, do you see any strong celebrity presence in that?
Are you asking if I can think of any celebrities who take abolitionist positions or identify as celebrities besides Colin?
Well, that or that, and along with that, how do you see that as a part of our movement
Oh,
for
that's
this?
a good question. Yeah, I don't know. Do y'all know anyone else? Who?
It's tough. It's tough. There are any number that take reformist positions, but
I don't know.
really being vocal
Martha
about
Stewart?
abolitionist
What y'all
positions.
say? You being funny? What? Well, she's directly impacted, so it may.
Well, Jay-Z
For
said
me-
we were calling him the N-word if we called him a
Oh my,
capitalist,
yeah,
so
I
not
can't
him.
even. Yeah, I don't know. I'm like, I can't. There's not one other person besides Colin Kaepernick, Jesse Williams, Anatomy,
about
Grey's
him.
Anatomy Bay. Anyone else?
It's bleak. DeRay.
As a celebrity, well, that's a whole nother I know. That's another after the meeting conversation.
Because he wasn't, he was like, not before he did the activism.
Yeah,
Kinda
it was
made
a
him
pipeline.
name.
Who? I don't have a hard time. Because here's the thing: when you say staunch abolitionist, when I think of, it's just so weird. I know I wrote a book called Becoming Abolitionists, but abolitionist is a really interesting identity to take up alone, right? And part of the reason why the title is plural is because of something that Dylan Rodriguez says, which is there's no such thing as an individual abolitionist. It requires you to be in struggle, and it requires an engagement with lots of different radical projects, which is why lots of different organizations, people, projects, ideas, concepts come up in the book. Like, it's not like a how-to book on becoming abolitionist, but it's like, here's all these different organizations, here's what they've tried, here's what these people have done, here's how these people started out, and here's why they shifted. That's why it goes that way. Because I've met people who are very excited to be an abolitionist, but then I have ideas of capitalism. And so I would be surprised if there are a lot of staunch abolitionists. I would be surprised if there are a lot of staunch abolitionist celebrities, because you would just be rich. And I'm curious about their relationship to capitalism and the concentration of private property. Not saying you can't. Now, the thing about Colin Kaepernick is that he was rich and then he was politicized, right? And that thing sort of happened. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's something, another Red Emma's friend Dave Zirin writes a lot about this, talks about that out there.
Who does?
Dave Zirin, who's a DC-based political writer.
Yeah, sports writer in DC.
So I had to ask him the same question in terms of that role. Aton Thomas is a former NBA who talks about it. And I'm not really sure where Aton's role is. I know Aton is very vocal about police brutality. In fact, that's what his latest book deals with. But I'll have to ask him to what degree he intersects with abolition versus
they got
reform.
too much stuff. Rich people have too much stuff.
So.
And we have lots of police who just take their stuff. So
I feel like there was a thing where even if they were not necessarily on the ground or super hardcore, there was, I know we hear stories about how celebrities were given money during the civil rights movement. I don't know if that's happening now or if it's a thing that we'll hear about it 30 years later, that maybe
that happened.
folks were writing checks.
Jay-Z bailed people out of jail in Ferguson. So stuff like that happens. So stuff like that happens, but I don't know if, I know stuff like that happens. I know there's people who donate lots of money to organizations. Lots of everyday working class people donate lots of money to organizations, too, because it's sort of what they're trying to do to be responsive to the movement. And it's also a way for some other groups of people to say, I'm not going to go out there and protest, but I'll contribute. Here's my way of contributing. So that's a whole nother thing. We need people to do all of it. We need people to fight and not just sort of pay their way through it too. So we need money to help fund some of the resources that we need to fight, but we also need people to fight and throw down and go to these letter writing meetings, right? To go to these tenant meetings. We need people to show up and to ask questions and to engage. And money isn't a substitute for that. It's nice, we'll take your money, but it's also not a substitute for your presence. Because when we counter protest or we show up in front of police lines, they don't see how much money we have in our bank accounts from your donations. What they do see is 100 people or 200 people or 400 people stopping an arrest or preventing a deportation. So we need bodies for people who can, or we need people to show up to meetings or come to the online Zoom meetings. Even if your camera's off, we just need people there to the best that we can to get plugged in.
Is there a final, one more last question, and then I was going to ask you to close with a final paragraph or passage from the book, if you wish.
I just attended one meeting, so I don't really know the organization super well, but Black Alliance for Peace is organizing against U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM. It's a program where the U.S. has bases in almost every African country or some military involvement in Africa. The past couple decades have been defined by oil wars. The next several decades will be defined by precious metals and renewable energy, which is pretty much all in Africa. So that's going to be the next huge site of imperial expansion and war. And I think that, I guess if you wanted to say something about internationalism and the role that plays in abolition.
Yeah. I mean, like I was trying to say earlier, that deep engagement with abolitionist politics is not singularly around internationalist politics, right? I think that's why so many people who organize around abolition also ask questions of, what's happening across borders. It's an engagement with how police and the military maintain and enforce borders, because that's where property and wealth is concentrated. So absolutely. I mean, I don't even know where to start. I think that part of why it's so important to be constantly reading also people who are doing the level of thinking and argument across borders, because that's how we stay informed of those struggles, and that's how we develop an analysis and then a solidarity with those struggles. And so I remember when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was a huge difference with people I knew who I struggled with and their responses to that intervention, which were anti-war responses, versus people who were in solidarity with Ukraine. Like it just showed markedly, like, oh, these people have deep internationalist politics where they understand that all war is bad, right? Versus like, okay, we need to affirm military intervention from the U.S. that contributes to spread more war, right? And so it's having an analysis and developing, forming those analyses with other people is so important, because that's how, again, you sort of figure out, okay, how should I land on this problem? How am I thinking with other people instead of telling simple stories of who's a hero and who's a perpetrator of violence, right? So projecting that onto these broader narratives. So I know there are people who are fighting against that. So also people who are fighting against U.S. intervention in Haiti. That's a huge issue right now, because I know that because of, centuries of exploitation of that tiny black island who's still being punished for fighting back, still being punished, right? There's been a call for help from first world nations, and we know that help comes through imperialism, and that imperialism will lead to more people being killed. And so it's so important to be a part of an organization who's thinking about these things and figuring out, how to be responsive to them. But yeah, absolutely, so important. I don't think you want me to read the last chapter. My voice don't sound like your voice. You should read the last paragraph. I don't have good voice reading.
Thank you so much. Your voice is just fine, but we are going to make sure that everybody has a chance to get the last paragraph themselves right over there and take it home and practice it in your own voice. And perhaps even more importantly, share that voice with others, because what we're doing here and what our guests have led us in tonight is this type of organizing, connecting, and networking that has to happen across issues, particularly this one. Before we give up one last round of applause, we want to remind everybody, as I say, the book is available over there. These books are available, so you can bundle them, all right? You get no discount like the insurance companies, but you can go ahead and get more of them. Be sure, again, to look at our upcoming events. Be sure to be here this coming Wednesday, the 26th, as we continue what is really part and parcel of this same conversation. Is Tawanda Jones and the West Wednesday, the West Coalition, joins us here in Red Emma's at 7 p.m. where we'll get into some more of these issues, particularly vis-a-vis the prosecution of killer cops. Again, if you want to join us tomorrow night for Chelsea Manning over at 2640, we ask that you go and RSVP on the website. And again, if you need any more help with that, we ask that you touch base with one of us this evening. Appreciate you. This has been dynamic and very important. Please take home the book, and let's give up one more big round of applause for Lisa Snowden and Derecka Purnell.